It moved like a man, but it wasn't, and he only knew it was watching because the forest had stopped breathing. The Norse believed their gods once walked among them in Midgard. That's our world. They spoke of borders, ancient boundaries separating Earth from the 8 other realms. But what if those borders weren't unbreakable? What if something crossed over or was left behind? Because deep in the woods, where the light thins and the silence thickens, something has either entered the human realm or refused to leave. Not gods, not ghosts, something older. They called them trolls. Not the kind that live under bridges or grin from tourist shops in Oslo. No, these were the forest dwellers, rarely seen, even more rarely survived. Because if you heard one before you saw it, you were already too close, and it was already too late. Our tale begins with Huldrek, a woodsman's son from a village nestled deep in the far northern forest, where the cliffs are sharp and the pines whisper secrets, and the sun forgets to rise for weeks at a time. He wasn't brave, but he was desperate. His brother had vanished 3 nights before, tracking game beyond the ridge that locals avoided. The elders called it Troll Forest. The old stories said that the place never gave back what it took, but Huldrek went anyway. He followed blood-slicked leaves, snapped branches, a trail that whispered of something enormous and human-shaped, but the first true sign wasn't what he saw, it's what he didn't hear. No birds, no breeze, not even the sound of his own footsteps, only the quiet crush of light snowfall. Huldrek stepped into the dense woods, following a path he imagined his brother might have taken. But the moment his boots sank into the thawed forest floor, he felt it. Something else moved with him. He froze. The trees didn't stir. The air held its breath. Then quietly he moved on, eyes scanning the undergrowth for broken branches, for blood, for the sign that his brother had passed that way. The trees grew too close here. Huldrek hadn't noticed it at first. He was too focused on the trail. But now the branches clawed at his cloak like fingers. The trunks narrowed inward like teeth, turning the forest into a throat. Huldrek and his brother were skilled trackers, and they knew how to navigate the woods. But this was different. Even the best woodsmen could lose their way here, get turned around, and swallowed whole. But he had to take the risk. His brother was out there. 3 days ago, Revenant had gone hunting with 2 others. Only one came back, bloodied, stammering, unable to say what he had seen. His eyes kept darting to the trees, and the last words he managed before his wounds and terror claimed him were, "It moved like a man." It was. Huldrek remembered the way his mother had wept without making a sound, her hands wringing the scrap of Oren's tunic, like she could pull him back with enough tears. The villagers warned Huldrek not to go, but he went. Because he had to know, even if what waited in the dark already knew he was coming. Huldrek stumbled upon a scene that he suspected had shattered the lone survivor. There were signs of a struggle, but not as many as you'd expect. Whatever had happened here, it happened fast. The ground was barely disturbed, just a smear of dried black blood on the bark. A single skid mark as if something had been dragged, maybe a meter, then nothing, gone, or lifted. And then he saw it, just one footprint. It wasn't right. It was pressed deep into the soil. No boots, not paws, but something in between. The print measured from the tip of his hand to his elbow, and the indentions on the one end looked like 5 thick toes. There was no way this could have been a bear, and definitely not a man. By noon, the light had already thinned. In the troll forest, the sun seemed afraid to linger. The season was shifting, edging towards that time of year when the sun barely brushed the horizon, when the forest refused to melt and ice thickens like old scars. It's a time when wind bites no matter how ready you think you are. Huldrek lit a torch, more for comfort than need. The fire made the trees seem further away, but it did not warm him. The cold here was different. It wasn't in the wind, it was in the land itself. That's when he found it, a strip of wool snagged on the thorns, threaded with frost and blood. He knew it was his brother's. A knot twisted in his chest. He had proof now. His brother made it this far. So where was he? Or where was his body? The direction seemed clear, but in these woods, nothing ever stayed certain. Huldrek paused beside a hollow pine. The old stories warned about, the kind trolls were said to sleep beneath when storms rolled through. As a child, he'd laughed at those trolls that turned to stone in sunlight. Trolls that recoiled at the sound of bells. Trolls that could smell human sweat from far off and hated nothing more than a trespasser. But now, he wasn't laughing. He hadn't broken a sweat all day. He'd barely dared to breathe. The light was almost gone, and the silence was deafening. Huldrek began to realize the last part might be true, the part about trespassing. His brother must have crossed some unspoken boundary, and if Orvind had crossed it, then so had he. A cold weight settled into his chest. He froze, not from the cold, but from the thoughts clawing their way through his mind. So he stood still and listened, and that's when he heard it. Crack. A branch snapped under the weight of something large. Not a stumble, a deliberate step. He turned slowly, reached for his axe, eyes wide, heart a drumbeat of warnings. Crack. Closer. Then, silence. The kind of silence you feel. Heavy, like a held breath that wouldn't release. The woods didn't whisper. They waited. He stood frozen for minutes, maybe longer. The sound didn't return, but neither did the feeling leave. Eventually the woods exhaled. A bird called. A squirrel scurried through the underbrush, as if the forest had simply decided to let him go. For now. He took a step towards where he heard and felt the presence. Then another, maybe a third. That's when he saw them. Tracks. Less than 10 feet away. Something had been close, very close. They were fresh, heavy, unmistakable. He wasn't alone. He was being watched. Or worse, he was being tracked. Later that day, Huldrek reached the edge of a cleft. A deep, jagged fissure in the earth, as if some ancient giant had torn the land apart in rage. Trees clung to the rim like crooked teeth. The wind moved through it like a breath through a throat, slow, cold, watching. He hesitated. Something in him urged retreat. But then he saw it, the marks, deep gouges in the stone like claws dragged in fury. And bones, dozens scattered like petals, some animal, some not. And then he saw it, a strip of fabric still knotted at the collar. Orvind's tunic, snagged on a stone, 20 feet down. He didn't think, he climbed. The rock face scraped his palms, loose gravel gave way beneath his boots. Halfway down he paused, not for breath, but because something shifted in the air. The light seemed thinner here, quieter. Then he dropped the final few feet and landed hard. The bottom of the cleft was colder than the forest above. The air didn't move, it pressed in. Like the sky itself had collapsed and buried his breath here. Huldrek followed the trail of bones, his boots slid across the wet moss and splintered ribs. A skull stared up at him, human, and split clean down the center. Then he saw it, a shape slumped beneath a stone overhang. Not a man, not a beast. Something massive, hunched in the shadows, covered in dark, matted fur. It didn't stir. It wasn't breathing. It wasn't sleeping. Was it dead? He crept forward, axe drawn. Every nerve begged him to turn back, but something deeper pulled him on. Not courage, not grief, something older, as if the story itself demanded he take the next step. He reached out and he touched the fur. It was cold, hard, stone, not carved, not shaped, This thing was once alive. He caught his breath. The sagas must be true. Trolls turned to stone in daylight? This one had died mid-reach, claw-like fingers frozen in the act of grasping something or someone. Then he heard it again, breathing. Behind him, Huldrek turned slowly as if even his heartbeat feared to move, and there it was, not the one turned to stone, another, taller, broader. Its eyes reflected no light, just a sheen like midnight trapped in stone. Its chest rose and fell. No growl, no rush. Just watching, staring. And in that moment, something broke. Not in the air, but in the creature. Was it the fear of sunlight? The threat of turning to stone? Or something else? Grief from a petrified mate. Maybe the sense of common grief they both shared in losing someone close. The being stepped back, turned, and walked along a narrow path, one Huldrek hadn't seen until now. Then, without a sound, it vanished into the trees. But a moment later, it returned. Not charging, not threatening. Its head lifted just enough to meet Huldrek's gaze. Then, it did something Huldrek could have never imagined. It beckoned. Not with a word, not even with a gesture. The meaning was clear. His legs resisted, his breath stuttered, but something inside him moved. Not out of bravery, not out of madness, but because the troll wasn't just a creature now. It had gone beyond anything the sagas ever told. It showed real, almost human-like emotion and understanding. Huldrek stepped forward, then another. Then the trees closed behind them like a curtain. The trail wound down into a grove choked with roots and moss. The light dimmed to a breath. And then, beneath an outcrop of stone, he saw it. Orvin's body, curled like a child, hands folded, eyes closed. Not torn, not mauled, laid to rest. Huldrek's knees buckled. He didn't cry, not yet. He just stared, and then slowly he looked up. The troll was watching him, but this time it looked tired. There was no victory in its stance, only silence, shared silence. Something passed between them, a recognition, not of species, not of words, but of grief. Then the troll looked down at the two brothers, lingered for a breath longer, and lowered its head and turned away. It stepped back into the woods, as if its purpose had been fulfilled. Huldrek stood in the hush for a moment, knowing that he had been spared, not out of mercy, but mourning. Huldrek wouldn't remember the climb out of the wooded cleft where he found his brother. Only one thing stayed with him, the creature's eyes. Not angry, not wild, just knowing. He walked for hours without direction. His torch burned low, its flame a trembling whisper in the growing dark. The trees no longer pressed in, they simply watched. Sentinels of bark and shadow, and he could feel it now. Not just something in the woods, but more than one. Shapes he couldn't see, eyes he couldn't name, breaths that didn't stir the leaves but stirred him. There was no evidence of dwelling places, no paths, only the occasional footprint. So fresh it seemed just made, yet so delicate the forest itself would erase it quickly and quietly. He thought of the petrified troll, its reaching hand, the ledge of bones. Surely this was evidence that would convince others of their existence. But then he understood. Few would ever make it far enough to see such a sight, and fewer still would make it out alive. He continued in silence, and he knew they were still there, and they were watching. A day later, Huldrek stumbled back into the village, starving, frostbitten, eyes hollow with something no one could name. But he was alive. Warmed and fed, he told them everything. Orvin's fate, the trolls, the cleft in the earth like a wound, the way he was stalked in the silence. But one part he left out, the moment of connection. Brief, wordless, uncanny, with the troll that spared him. Maybe he feared no one would believe that something so wild could feel grief, or maybe some part of him wanted to keep that moment for himself. Most didn't believe him anyway, but in the years that followed, the village noticed one thing. The hunters returned from their expeditions. The herds flourished, and there were very few cases of vanishing animals or men. Still, no one trespassed too deep into the troll forest. Stories have a way of creating boundaries. Huldrek never knew if the trolls had moved on, migrated to colder lands, their grief carried with them like old stones, or were they exercising some form of compassion for the people at the edge of their domain? Years passed. Huldrek had not returned to the edge of the woods, let alone venture in. But this spring was different. A strange weight pulled at him. Not dread, not hope, curiosity, to see if the frozen figure still waited with outstretched hands and unseen sorrow, to see if anything remembered him as clearly as he remembered it. Thank you for watching this YouTube exclusive. You can find full episodes of the Viking Legacy and Lore podcast here on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I hope you join us there.